James here. Grab your coffee and sit down. These photos are from a time when rock music felt like it was happening specifically to you. Not to everyone, just to you. 25 shots today. Let's go back. Look at this. Guitar pressed against his face, eyes closed, completely gone. Nobody knew his name yet. 3 albums in, still fighting for radio play, still opening for other people. Same year this was taken, he opened for the Rolling Stones on a big arena tour. The crowd booed him off the stage. Not politely ignored, booed. He walked off after a few songs the second night and never went back. His manager wanted him to finish the set. He refused. In my opinion, that moment defined everything that came after. He decided right there he wasn't going to spend his career chasing an audience that wasn't ready for him. He'd build his own world instead, and that's exactly what he did. Whether you think that was genius or arrogance, that's the question worth arguing about. 500,000 people behind him, hand on his head like he can't quite process the scale of what's in front of him. U2 were still the opening act that day, not the headliners. The story goes, they played like they had nothing to lose, because at that point, they genuinely didn't. War had just come out. They were nobody in America, and somehow, that freed them completely. 6 months after this photo, everything was different. Sometimes being the underdog is the best position you'll ever be in. Face to face on stage. Neither of them performing for the crowd right now. They're performing for each other. This is before the solo albums, before the lawsuits, before 40 years of interviews about whose band it really is. 2 people who genuinely needed each other. I'm not sure that was ever fully true again after the mid-70s. 4 people, all in the same frame. And if you know anything about The Who, you know how rarely that was a comfortable situation. Townsend and Daltrey had a proper physical fight on stage in 1965. Daltrey punched him. Townsend had him fired. The rest of the band voted him back in. Moon was Moon, a separate force of nature that nobody fully controlled, including himself. And Entwistle just stood there at the side of the stage, played the most melodic bass lines in rock, and watched the chaos around him like a man waiting for a bus. Honestly, Entwistle is the most underrated person in this photo by a mile. Everyone argues about Townsend and Daltrey. Everyone's got a Keith Moon story. And Entwistle held the whole thing together for 15 years without a single dramatic interview about it. If you disagree, destroy me in the comments. Full splits on a dressing room floor, boots on, laughing. This is Stevie Nicks 3 months after Rumors sold 10 million copies. Whatever you pictured her life looking like backstage, it looked like this. White shirt, black vest. This is the Thin White Duke, the character Bowie built for the Station to Station tour. Elegant, cold, barely human. What was actually happening behind that character is one of the strangest stories in rock. Bowie was living in LA, barely eating. Later said he had almost no memory of recording the album or doing the tour at all. He talked in interviews years later about paranoia so bad he couldn't leave certain rooms. The specifics vary depending on who's telling it, and I've read enough versions to know nobody agrees on the details. And yet Station to Station might be the best record he ever made. Precise, controlled, completely deliberate. I've never fully resolved that. How do you make something that focused when you're that far gone? Maybe the character was the only thing holding him together. Maybe the work was the only real thing left. This photo was taken the night Mick Taylor told Mick Jagger he was quitting. At a party, in person. Jagger reportedly didn't believe him for about 20 minutes. Taylor had just played on some of the best Stones records ever made. Nobody quits after that. Except he did. That is a working fireplace on a private jet. Led Zeppelin had a fireplace installed in their touring aircraft in 1975. There is genuinely nothing to add to that. Burns standing on the couch in a coat the size of a small tent, staring at the ceiling. The rest of the band has clearly accepted whatever this is. CBGB on a Tuesday, graffiti on every surface, a couch that had seen better decades, the kind of place your parents would have locked you out of the house for visiting. Me and an old buddy used to argue for hours about whether Talking Heads were actually a rock band or just rock adjacent. Never settled it. Where do you come down on that? Not a stage, not a photo shoot. A mattress on a floor, two people from bands you've heard of, looking like everyone else looked in New York that year. Broke, slightly wrecked, completely alive. Ancient Roman amphitheater. No audience. Not a small crowd, not a private show. Literally no one in the seats. Pink Floyd set up their equipment in a 2,000-year-old archaeological site in southern Italy and played a full concert for empty stone bleachers. Gilmour, shirtless in the afternoon heat, eyes down on the strings. No one to react, no one to impress. Just the sound going up into the open sky and disappearing into whatever was left listening. I've thought about this photo more than almost any other. There's something about it that feels less like a concert and more like a decision. Whatever Pink Floyd became in the next 2 years, Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, I think something about it started here. In an empty amphitheater with nobody watching, playing like it mattered anyway. Same band 4 years earlier. Syd Barrett center stage, laughing, completely present. Those objects on the floor in front of him were part of an early surround sound experiment. The story goes they actually got banned from the venue afterwards for releasing bubbles and flowers into the audience without permission. 6 months after this photo, Barrett could barely finish a song on stage. The distance between these two Pink Floyd photos is everything. The guy leaning on the stage is Storm Thorgerson. He designed the covers for Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals. Most people couldn't pick him out of a lineup. Gilmour's up on the amp behind him, not paying attention. Two people who made some of the most recognizable visual art of the 20th century, in a completely ordinary moment. Laughing in a recording studio in Jamaica. Looks relaxed, looks happy, looks like someone having the best afternoon of the year. 1976 was not that for Clapton. He'd spent most of the early 70s in a heroin spiral bad enough that friends staged interventions, bad enough that Pete Townsend essentially dragged him back onto a stage. The Jamaica trip was part of a genuine attempt to pull himself together. Whether the smile in this photo is real or performed, honestly, I'm not sure anyone knows. Maybe he wasn't sure either. Three of the best musicians of their generation on a TV stage in Holland, playing together for one of the last times. By 1968, Cream were done. Bruce and Clapton could barely stand to be in the same room, and Baker was fighting with everyone, including himself. What kills me about this photo is how good they look performing. No sign of it. Three people who genuinely couldn't stand each other, playing like a unit. That's a specific kind of professionalism that doesn't get talked about enough. Cow Palace, San Francisco. Two people who genuinely liked each other, on the same stage, both at the height of their powers. No rivalry, no drama, just two friends who happen to be very good at the same thing. Rock history doesn't have enough of those stories. Chess between takes on the set of The Hunger. Bowie playing a vampire. Deneuve playing a vampire. Both of them looking like they're actually thinking about the board. Bowie said in at least one interview that it was the only film set he'd ever been on where he felt like the least interesting person in the room. Coming from him, in 1983, that's either very humble or very specific. I've read different accounts of whether they got along or barely spoke off camera. Nobody quite agrees. Two men who made some of the most technically precise records of the 70s and reportedly made each other miserable for most of 40 years doing it. Becker died in 2017. By most accounts, they hadn't really resolved whatever it was between them. Some creative partnerships work exactly because nothing ever gets settled. Bass held vertical like a weapon, face completely concentrated, 21 years old. This is not the Paul McCartney of the press photos and the press conferences. This one looks like he's about to start an argument. I've always thought the early Beatles photos are the most interesting ones, precisely because nobody had figured out the image yet. This is just a kid who was very serious about what he was doing. The first photo ever taken of the Rolling Stones. 5 guys sitting on a pavement in London. No stylist, no concept, no idea what was coming. The sign behind them says, "No parking." Nobody told them where to stand. They just sat down in the street. That's it. That's the beginning. 4 teenage girls who wanted to play rock and roll and found a manager who was willing to make that happen. On his terms. Kim Fowley created the Runaways, and by most accounts of people who were there, the way he treated them was genuinely ugly. The stories that came out later, particularly from Cherie Currie and others, are not ambiguous. What gets lost in that narrative is how good the band actually was. Joan Jett in this photo, she's 16, maybe 17, and she already looks like she knows exactly who she is. She went on to build one of the most stubborn and independent careers in rock. Everything that came after was partly a reaction to what happened inside this band. In my opinion, the Runaways deserve a completely separate conversation from Kim Fowley. They're not the same story, even though everyone tells it that way. 6 people in this photo. Brian Wilson is the one you keep looking for. By 1972, he'd largely stopped touring, stopped engaging, retreating into something that his bandmates and family couldn't fully reach. The group kept going without him, and the question of whether that was the right call, whether they should have stopped and waited, is one I've never seen anyone answer cleanly. The Beach Boys without Brian Wilson is a philosophical problem disguised as a band. Ray and Dave Davies. Brothers who fought so badly on tour that crew members sometimes had to physically separate them. Punches thrown on stage, in dressing rooms, in hotel lobbies. They kept making records together for 30 years anyway. Some things are stronger than the reasons to stop. Hot Space had just come out. American rock radio wanted nothing to do with it. The disco and funk influences went over badly with the audience Queen had spent 10 years building. The tour continued anyway. Freddie in a striped t-shirt, no costume, no theater. Just 4 people doing press for an album that wasn't landing. What's interesting is that this exact low point pushed them toward Live Aid 3 years later. Sometimes the wrong record at the wrong time forces the recalibration that saves everything. 4 people leaning against a wall in the sun. Nothing dramatic. No one performing for the camera. 1994 was the year Monster came out. R.E.M., going electric and loud after years of being the quiet alternative band. It divided people sharply. Some thought it was a reinvention. Others thought it was a mistake. What I keep coming back to is what happened to this specific lineup over the next decade. Bill Berry had an aneurysm on stage in 1995 and left the band 2 years later. The 3 that remained kept going until 2011, when they just stopped. A press release, no drama, no farewell tour. Just done. Looking at this photo, nobody in it knows any of that yet. They're just 4 people in the sun in 1994, in the middle of something that feels like it'll go on indefinitely. It never does. It never does for any of them. 25 photos. Most of them nobody planned. Somebody just pointed a camera at the right moment. The ones that stay with you are never the ones taken on purpose. Which one hit different than you expected?